Okay. Good evening. I mean, if you look at the Wi-Fi heading, this is the Ashkelon women's shiur, but Ashkelon doesn't have many of the women in it. I don't know how much people are aware of anyone who might be watching this who's not from Ashkelon. Ashkelon, out of out of like 98% of the Medina is really getting it the worst. After that Ritzuah of Yishuvim, of settlements and communities right near Gaza, it's been very tough in Ashkelon, and our hearts and our prayers and our wishes go out to everyone who's in the line of fire of these terrible people. And these terrible people are sort of obliquely the topic of tonight's class. So if you look at the highlighted title there, Hamas-Defining Evil. Now, before I do the psukim, I wrote a little explanation. Hamas, the group, the name is an acronym from the Arabic Haraka al-Mukawama al-Islamiyah. I'm sure I said that terribly. I hope any Arabs who might listen in, I apologize. Which means the Islamic Resistance Movement. It's an acronym. It's the first letter of those three words, and it spells out Hamas. But for us, that word has a totally different connotation, which is I wrote here is serendipitous for my purpose, because I want to talk about in the Parsha, Hamas sadly figures prominently right at the beginning of the Parsha. And it's in two psukim right at the beginning of the Parsha. And it's verses 11 and then in 11 and 13. And it goes, V'tishachet ha'aretz lifnei ha'elokim. And the earth became corrupt. Now, I'm using the word corrupt. That's the JPS translation. Lahashchit means to destroy. So it could mean that the world was like falling apart. What might be a decent translation, as opposed to the translation that from the JPS, which is sort of standard, which is corrupt. Okay, so we're going to have to deal with what does that word mean in a few minutes. We'll do it. V'timaleh ha'aretz Hamas, and the land was filled with, again, the JPS, Jewish Publication Society, translation of Hamas is lawlessness. Now, even though I'm saying lawlessness, what we're going to see most of our evening, at least the first half of the evening, is going to be trying to understand what the word Hamas means, the Hebrew word Hamas, unless we're going to worry about the word Tishachet, to become destroyed, corrupted, just falling apart. And then the second time, 2 verses later, we have Vayomer Elokim LeNoach. And God finally, after watching this terrible process of the world destroying itself morally, calls on Noach, and he says to him, Kates kol basar balafenai. The end of all flesh has come before me, because not only humans are going to die in this cataclysm, in this mabul, but a lot of other animals are going to die. Land animals and birds, fish, sea animals are going to survive, basically. Key. So he says, why is the destruction going to come? And the rabbis in the Gemara are going to make a big deal out of this. Key, because Malah ha'aretz Hamas mipneihem, because the land has become filled with, again, lawlessness. I think the most popular translation for the word Hamas is violence, has become violent. But we'll see a number of ways of dealing with the term just in a few minutes. Okay. V'hinenei mashchitim et haaretz, and behold, I am going to destroy the land. So in the first verse, we have the verb lahashchit, to destroy, then the noun Hamas, violence, lawlessness, bad stuff. Okay. Now, in the sentence that is said to Noah, the two words are flipped. And the first word, again, still means some form of violence, crime, lawlessness. But the next word, lahashchit, no longer means that we, the denizens of this world, have become destructive. It's going to say, I'm going to destroy them. So the word lahashchit means to destroy. But first, God says that humanity has caused destruction of the world order. As a result of that, God turns to Noah and says, therefore, I'm going to destroy what's left of civilization and the world in which you live. And we're going to build it again anew. So the first time, people were destructive. Second time, God is destructive. We're going to talk about the word destruction, but we're going to focus much more on the word Hamas. But we'll do both. Emphasis on Hamas. Rashi. Vatishachet, the earth was corrupt, or the people of the earth were corrupt. It's not so clear. What does corrupt mean? Well, I mean, when I see the word corrupt, I usually think of white-collar crime, or politicians, taking bribes, or judges on the take. But here, Rashi explains that corrupt means lewdness and idolatry. It means pritzut. It means acts of promiscuity, acts of sexual licentiousness. Now, I giggled a little bit when I said the word, because Rivka and I drove through Ramat Beit Shemesh Bet the other day, and there are signs painted all over the place. Prutzot. What do they say? Prutzot, loli kanes, or prutzot, hachutza, out with the prutzot. And what's for them, a licentious woman is a woman that might wear a dress or a blouse where you can see her elbow, and therefore they would throw them out of the neighborhood. We actually saw this small simta, this small passageway in a small. I hate to call it a mall. It was like a strip mall type thing, and it was divided. Men on one side, one of the thoroughfares, one of the sidewalks was separated by gender. Okay, but that's not what it means here. Here, promiscuity means actual acts of sexual promiscuity and idolatry. So the corruption is both a physical, perhaps sexual term, but it's also an idolatrous term. It has to do with the way you lead your life, both in terms of your mores, but also in terms of your hashkafa, your worldview, your religion. Okay, and so he brings a verse from Devarim that he claims proves his point. I don't think so, but okay, okay, it wasn't as self-evident to me. And then he said the world was filled with violence. So we're not saying lawlessness now. Now we're saying violence, and that means robbery. So there's two kinds of robbery in general in Jewish thought. There's Geneva. He's a ganav, right? Geneva is when you steal things in some sort of like sneaky way. A pickpocket, okay, is a ganav, okay? I mean, you could also say someone that overcharges is a ganav, okay? But in any case, that is a non-violent crime, as opposed to gezel. Gezel, a gazlan, is like a highwayman or an armed robber. That's like John Dillinger coming in with pistols and shooting up a bank type thing. So there's two kinds. So we're dealing now with the gezela, the violent crime, armed robbery. Okay. And then we said later, verse 13, it should be 1-3, not just 3. For the earth is filled with violence. The fate was sealed only on account of the sin of robbery. That's a Gemara, as you see in Sanhedrin. The people of planet Earth in those 10 generations from Adam Arishon, from first human, to Noach, they were destroying, ruining the world. But God didn't decide to actually bring the Mabul, the cataclysm, the flood, until their world was filled with Hamas. And that's a Gemara that when God turns to Noach and says, it's come before me that the world is filled with Hamas. Now I have to destroy it. So Hamas was the straw that broke not the camel's back, but in this case, planet Earth's back. That was the last straw, was that. Okay. So we've got two pieces of information from Rashi that's really important to us. The first one is that Hamas means armed robbery. And the second one is that was the sin that put planet Earth over the top. It's got to go. And we're going to have to rebuild. The Ibn Ezra, when he was dealing with the word Hamas, said it's not just theft. It's not just stealing things in an aggressive, violent way. It's also oppression and taking women against their will. Now, oppression means taking things from people against their will, but it's not with a gun. It might be with some legal maneuver, that poor people lose their home because the bank foreclosed on their mortgage. That would be this kind of oppression, that people should try not to behave that way. Okay. And the last one is, so it means also kidnapping women to make them part of your household, which was not uncommon in the ancient world. It was, especially in warfare. In wars, there was booty and plunder after a victory, but there was also slaves and women to be taken home. So that's how the Ibn Ezra says that it's all kinds of nasty behavior, straight theft, underhanded thievery, but also the kidnapping and taking women captive. Okay. And would include rape. The Ramban is expanding on what's happening here. And he says violence, again, Hamas, violence, which we saw was lawlessness. I like violence is the best translation. That is robbery and oppression. Robbery, armed robbery, oppression, acting in really nasty ways to take over other people's property, other people's possessions. Now, God gave Noah the explanation that the flood was due to the fact that the earth is filled with violence, and did not mention the corruption of the way. Now, the other things that have to do with idolatry and promiscuity, that doesn't get mentioned. When it's time to destroy the world, it's Hamas that gets the big headlines, because violence is a sin that is known and widely publicized. Let's be honest, a lot of these other crimes can be done in like a private, unknown way. But when someone comes around, with a sword or a gun and is shooting up the town and violently, grabbing people and grabbing things, that's a well-known thing. And so that people know, and everybody understands that's wrong. It's not always true if a bank maneuvers in such a way, or a businessman maneuvers in such a way to take over your property. Some people might say, it's not good, but it's not so bad. They're following the rules, yada, yada, yada. Okay. But when you come in and shoot them up. Now, when I read this, all I could think about was last Shabbos, not 2 days ago, 9 days ago, when the world, many of whom, aren't prone to say nice things about Eretz Yisrael and usually aren't in our corner, the world had to just gasp and say, this is Hamas, and double entendre there in both meanings of the word. This is not acceptable behavior in our world. And this kind of thing is going on in some islands, off of Indonesia or the Philippines or something. And it's going off in some places in Africa. But most of those people don't have the chutzpah to film it and put it on WhatsApp or X or whatever social media or they use. Doesn't make any difference. Okay, I mean, it's like there was pride in their nefarious work, and that's what the Ramban is saying. That when people do these things which cannot be ignored, then something has to happen. Then the world has to be destroyed, or in this case, Gaza has to be turned upside down. Rabbis have said that it was on account of the sin of violence that the feet would say, I don't even know why I could put that line in because we already saw that in Rashi. I should have cut that out. Okay. The reason for it is that the prohibition against violence is rational. Normal people don't do these things. If you do these things, there is something wrong with you. You must be a social pariah. And the Ramban is really speaking to our situation. The reason for that, there being no need for a prophet to admonish them again. As a prophet's going to come out and say, don't worship idols. Make sure that you don't act in a promiscuous way in your bedroom. Make sure that you're only having relations with your wife. Those things people have to be reminded of because they get away with it because they think nobody knows. No prophet got up and said, don't go out there and shoot up or kill your neighbors so that you can take their livestock. No prophet said that because you don't have to. Some things are just self-evident, and that's true of Hamas. Besides, it is evil committed against both heaven and mankind. They're not afraid of heaven, nor are they afraid of humanity. Thus he informed Noach of the sin for which the end is come, the doom is reached. When I read this, all I can think of, I hope this is the doom of Hamas. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying here to Noach about the world in that period. I just hope, but okay, we have a long ways to go. Okay. The Chizkuni, also a great commentary in Europe, one of the Bali Tosfot. There was discussion amongst the sages as to the difference between the word Hamas and the word Gezel. What's going on here? We have two different words in the Torah for armed robbery, and that's not usually true. Usually in the Torah, every word has a very specific meaning. We don't have synonyms in biblical Hebrew. We do in modern Hebrew, of course. But we're not supposed to have them in biblical Hebrew. So the Chizkuni asks, there's got to be a difference between the two. According to there are a number of answers. I'm only giving one. According to Rabbi Hanina, the difference is merely in the amount stolen by violent means. This is fascinating. Gezel has to be an amount with which you can buy something significant. Hamas is you just did it for the sake, I just did it to let this person know I could do it. I beat up the kid and took his lunch money, not because it was a significant amount of money, but I just wanted to show him who's boss. So Hamas, which is just violence for the sake of violence because the profit motive basically doesn't exist, that's somehow worse. It's just nasty for the sake of being nasty. Okay. Another interpretation understands the word as indulging in sexual misconduct. Okay, so I'm not sure that this was universally accepted, that Hamas is violence, but there is sexual violence as well as monetary violence. Okay, and he uses a pasuk, okay, let the violence done to me and my kids be visible in Babylon. A third interpretation of the term, of what Hamas is, says the word Hamas is an alternative for idolatry. This is not commonly accepted, but since we know that idolatry is a terrible thing, it makes sense to use it for that. And he brings a verse, but idolatry wasn't yet really prohibited. Idolatry didn't really bother God yet. Everybody were idolaters in the good old days, right? So, okay, but that's an interpretation he's just mentioning. And lastly, some commentators understand the word Hamas as applying to shedding innocent blood. Shedding innocent blood. Now, sometimes there's a war and you shed blood, and afterwards you feel bad. But I mean, it was a war. What can I do? But then sometimes you shed blood just for the sake of shedding blood. And that's Hamas. And I think, again, that's something we've experienced here. Okay, so the Chizkuni is sort of the last of the commentaries who's going to deal with the meaning of the term. We're going to mostly deal with violence to take things, as that's the most common approach. But now we're going to talk about the phenomenon rather than the terminology. So the Or HaChaim, again, Or HaChaim, who died in Yerushalayim in 1750, having been born in Morocco, and was a great Sephardi scholar, but also a Mikubal, a famous mystic. If we accept the sage's interpretation that the violence mentioned here comprise such sin as bloodshed, incest, and idolatry, we can understand the harshness of the retribution. Now, as we saw, that Hamas can be interpreted in many ways. However, the most common interpretation, and the one we're mostly accepting, is you're taking money by force. If, however, the word Hamas refers to robbery with violence, why would the victims of the robbery suffer the same fate as the perpetrators of the crime? Everybody died in the Mabul, both the people who perpetrated the Hamas and those who were victims of the Hamas. That's not fair. If this is the crime that brought about the Mabul, some of the logic is missing, the Or HaChaim says. There's got to be something wrong. Reb Chaim Ben Attar was his name. Okay, something's got to be wrong. So he's going to interpret it. Our sages have explained the matter differently when they said that in any society in which sexual licentiousness, pritzut, abounds, retribution will strike both the wicked and the good people. If there's a lot of promiscuity, it affects everybody. Everybody is drawn down into the mud by it. Therefore, we must understand our verse as saying that though the decree to destroy mankind was sealed because of the prevalence of robbery with violence, the fact that amongst all the sins, there were many instances of sexual promiscuity resulting in the retribution, including also those who were innocent of robbery. So we're saying nobody that died was totally innocent, because there was only one totally innocent person in the world, and that was Noah, and he was saved along with his wife, sons, and daughters-in-law. So everybody was guilty of something, but not everybody was guilty from Hamas. But when Hamas became robbery with violence, became prevalent, then the world is an unfit place to continue. Excuse me. The people of that generation indulged in every form of robbery. Also, probably every form of idolatry, every form of promiscuity. Whenever they confronted someone stronger than themselves, they resorted to trickery. Otherwise, they had no qualms about simply grabbing what they fancied. In other words, nobody was safe from losing their possessions, and that was something that the Or HaChaim felt society can't exist. That's interesting. Uh, Judaism is relatively capitalistic. We definitely believe in private ownership. It's a major concept. So it's a little, it's a little ironic that communism was, or at least socialism was invented by a Jew, and so many Jews, especially in Russia, but in other places too, were drawn to it. But that concept of sharing is definitely big, but we also believe in the concept of private ownership. That is a basic tenet of Judaism, and Rabbeinu Bachai is pushing that agenda. And so, if you weren't an actual Hamasnik, violently taking things from somebody else, then you're doing it in other ways. You're figuring out how to trick them out of their possessions. Rabbeinu Bachai, God said that the end of flesh has come before me because of the robbery with violence that the earth has been filled with. Anyone who does not return stolen property will never be forgiven. Whoa. Here's a reason that's like a nice, like a Gemara chap. Why was this the crime that really brought the world to its knees? Because it's so hard to do tshuva. Now, almost any crime we believe you can do tshuva for. I mean, basically any crime. Even there are crimes that you can't do it, but then we see that people did because Hashem just opened the gates of rachamim for them. But one thing you cannot be forgiven for: if I've stolen something and never made retribution. And you have to be honest, when people are doing this kind of tremendous amount of armed robbery, you forget who you took it from, and it's a very big problem. I remember guys in yeshiva that by mistake would take somebody's pen or pencil. So we used to have in the back of the Beit Midrash. It eventually turned into a gemach for pens and pencils, but people would put pens and pencils there and say, "I don't know whose this is, so if you lost your pencil, you can come take it, or your pen." And here they are, because people felt guilty and they don't know whose it was, and so they did their best to get it back to the original owner. I'm sure Kadosh Baruch Hu, is kindly towards people trying to make restitution if they can, but you can't really get tshuva if you don't return. And these people, even if they decided to stop being violent Hamasnikim, they would still not be able to figure out who to give back all the stuff they took. Very few, I imagine, very few of these people kept a ledger. And on Tuesday, the 23rd of June, I took, I can't imagine that was what, I can't imagine like the horsemen with Genghis Khan, noting down what they grabbed that day. So the point of the Rabbeinu Bachai is a fascinating one, that this was such a bad crime because it's so hard to ever do tshuva and undo the evil that you've done. I like that, Rabbeinu Bachai. Okay, the Orchot Tzadikim. Now this is a Mussar work, a work of Jewish ethics, trying to discuss this issue rather than discussing it as an explanation, a commentary on the verse. He's talking more about the bigger ethical picture of it. Okay, our rabbi said, if there is a box filled with sins, this is a longer quote from that Gemara that said that the reason that the Mabul came was because of Hamas. But okay, if there is a box filled with sins, there is no more severe accuser among them than robbery. So that's an expanded version of that statement that the Mabul came because the flood came because of Hamas armed, violent robbery. Okay. And he who causes pain to an orphan or a widow through robbing them or shaming them or any kind of malicious pain is worthy of death through the power of heaven. These people should die bidei shamayim. In other words, these people who brutally take possessions from people who have very, very little, those parts of society that can't take care of themselves, that can't defend themselves. And traditionally in Judaism, we assume that those three groups that are prone to be taken advantage of and really can't defend themselves are widows, orphans, and converts. The converts are an important addendum to the list because, generally speaking, people were supported and helped when they were in trouble by their family. And Gerim don't have family. They've abandoned their families, so they are a little bit bereft of the normal protection that most people have in the bosom of their extended family. Extended family, sorry about that. Okay. This is also true. The Orchot Tzdikim adds, this is also true of judges who have the power to save them from the hands of their oppressors and do not fairly judge. This is a beautiful extension of our corruption, our corruption theme, that people who have power in society, responsibility in society, who abridge or corrupt those powers to really take advantage of the weakest in society, they're the worst. And this is considered a form of violent taking from people. It's more of a conceptual violence rather than an actual, taking out a knife type violence. But it's considered to be Hamas when a judge knows that the poor person should be winning this case. However, because he wants to get favors from the rich guy, he decides in his favor, even if he wasn't bribed. But if he was doing it in this conniving way, then he's performing this kind of act. And it's that kind of behavior that brings about destruction of society. Like in the Mabul, but just a society itself can just fall apart when people behave in such reprehensible ways. They are deserving of death. When we say death here, we don't mean that a court would condemn them and hang them or throw them off a cliff or whatever form of one of the four types of deaths that a Jewish court can mete out. It means bidei shamayim, that God should do something to these people that equals death. I just want to, okay, we have time. I just want to make an editorial comment. When we say mita bidei shamayim, there are two famous ways. There are others, but two famous ways of dealing what we mean by that. Either that means they die before their time, that God will, smite him with a heart attack, 20 years before he would the amount of time that was allotted to him at birth. Okay, that's one interpretation. Okay. The other one is that mita bidei shamayim, mita bidei shamayim means that that you lose your chelik in olam haba, that you not only die in this world, but you die in the world to come as well, which is a horrible punishment, of course. But anyways, when we say mita bidei shamayim, a death punishment meted out by heaven, it's generally interpreted in one of those two ways. I think the first one is more popular, but both of them exist in rabbinic literature. Okay, so the last two comments are more modern. Rav Meidan is presently one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Yeshivat Har Etzion. Yeshivat Har Etzion is a triumvirate of 3 Rosh Yeshivas, which is interesting. And he's really not only a fine Talmid Chacham, but he also loves to learn Chumash and Nach and comment on ideas, which a lot of Rosh Yeshivas that give Gemara Shirim and Halacha Shirim quite often don't concern themselves as much with issues in Tanakh. But Rav Meidan loves it, and he's excellent at it. And he's also a very wonderful person. I served in the army with him, and he was my daughter's Rebbe when she went to Migdalos for a while. Okay, so he's talking about this in a broader picture, very interesting. The term Hamas is understood as theft, and sometimes as theft condoned by law. We saw that, that's like judges or someone, the bank forecloses and the court say it's fine, even though they probably, they were using a loophole or something to do it. And now he gives an example based on a pasuk in Micha. It's just so happens, my niece is executive director of a Reform temple in Washington, D.C. And it's called Temple Micah. And it's fascinating that they named the place Temple Micah in the 90s, in almost 30 years ago, in that neighborhood of time, because they loved some of the ethical, moral ideas that are found in the book of Micah, Micha, especially, what does God ask me, or just to walk humbly in his way. Okay, but anyway, so this is a quote from Micha. Shall I count myself pure with wicked balances? Can I say I'm a firm guy, even though the scale in my store is corrupt? Or if I own a gas station, it says that a whole liter came out, but really only 9/10 of a liter came out. Excuse me. With wicked balances and deceitful weights. Now, if I'm not pure in my business practices, I have no right to call myself a tzaddik or call myself tahor. For its rich men are full of Hamas, rich men who bend the rules of society, who take advantage of loopholes and sometimes corruption in society to become wealthier. That's a form of Hamas. It doesn't mean I had to put a knife in his back. I could be perverting the rules of society. That's also going to be Hamas, according to Micha, because it's a violent act on the principles of society. And its inhabitants have spoken lies, and their tongue is deceitful. Their tongue is deceitful. It should be their tongues are deceitful. Their tongue is deceitful. Their tongues are deceitful. I don't know. Okay. I don't know. Okay. I have to think about that. Go to an editor. Okay. It is. This one I just cut and pasted. Sometimes the translations are mine. This one I just cut. Is it possible that the two sins are in fact a single sin that combines theft with sexual immorality, theft of women from the husbands? The sexual crime that bothers Tanakh the most is adultery, and that's a form of theft. The primary act of sexual crimes that makes it to the 10 Commandments, makes it to the headlines, makes it to to the big letters is adultery. And I know some congresswoman was wearing a red A on her shirt last week, and I don't know why she was doing it, because she felt bad about what was going on in Congress. The red A in the scarlet letter meant she committed adultery. She was, okay. I hope that this congresswoman was not going around saying that she was an adulteress. Okay, maybe she never read the book. Okay. I have this feeling sometimes we have Congress people that can't even read, let alone read books. But okay. Um, Theft of women for the husbands, perhaps even within the law, which is designed to protect the children of the gods. Now, sometimes people use the law for nefarious reasons. And we see this all the time in American courts. I'm sure in secular courts. I would like to think it doesn't happen as often in Jewish courts, but I bet it happens there too. If so, the description of the generation of the flood here would be a continuation of the description in the previous parsha. Here's what's bothering Rabbi Meidan. At the end of last week's parsha, the Torah said, the Lord saw how great was man's wickedness on earth and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the Lord regretted, charata, had second thoughts that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. Then he said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created. So in other words, last week's explanation is really talking about they're not planning things right. That instead of planning good things, they're planning bad things. It's a little bit different than what he says in the beginning of this week's, which says the earth became corrupt and the earth was filled with violent crime. That's different. But what Rav Meidan is trying to say here is perhaps if Hamas includes this nefarious behavior by courts and leaders, then maybe what we read last week was really feeding into this week. And we're letting you know that we think that behavior by people who should know better, that kind of behavior does bring about the destruction of society and is considered to be violent to the norms of society, and therefore has a Hamas element. If so, the description of the generation of the flood here would be a continuation of the description from last week's Parsha, previous Parsha. And it came to pass that when men began to multiply on the earth, the daughters were born to them. Distinguished men saw the daughters of men with fear, and they took them for wives, all of whom they chose. There were Nephilim. We don't know what Nephilim are. Some people think fallen angels. Some people just means high and mighty people that brought themselves morally and ethically low in the earth in those days, and when the distinguished men came to the daughters of men and they bore their children, they were mighty men of old, and they apparently were taking women that didn't belong to them. The strongest specimens of humanity who regarded themselves as the sons of God used their strength and authority to snatch women from their husbands. So in other words, maybe what was being said last week, all these plans people make, they're not for good, they're for bad. Maybe that was really the kind of violence that our Parsha is talking about. Maybe it's the same kinds of crime. I don't think so. I like very much what Rabbi Meidan says because he's unifying it. I think one of the reasons that the rabbis ended last week's Parsha where they did, a few verses into chapter 6 rather than at the beginning of chapter 6, because I think they wanted to differentiate between the earlier crimes that God was starting to regret having made the world and these later crimes, which are more violent. And now God says, now I really have to do something about this. I think there's a dichotomy, but I like the attempt of Rav Meidan to say, I think if you look at it in a certain way, there's a similarity and it is all of one piece. Okay, our last comment is from Rav Kook. Rav Kook, who of course died in 1935, but was very modern in a lot of his thinking ideas. And I think you're going to feel a certain modernity in what he has to say. And I think there's an important message for us in Rav Kook. The Edenic bliss, okay? So I wrote down the Hebrew there. So, what he means by Edenic, Eden, Gan Eden. Maybe I should have capitalized it. Okay, the Edenic bliss of intellectual understanding. In other words, wow, I get it. Someone's explaining something to you that you never got before. Like, how to download something on YouTube or something. And you say, oh my God, wow, I get it. And there's a certain bliss to that. Okay. So that of intellectual understanding is one experience, while the Edenic, the Eden bliss of the emotional realm is another. In other words, the beautiful aha moment when that light bulb goes off over your head is a wonderful moment. But there are emotional moments. I really see how much I love this person, or I'm really emotionally enjoying this experience. Those are both kinds of bliss that are very different. They're both beautiful. I hope everyone has experienced them both on occasion. Some people are more, on the intellectual side. Some people are on the emotional side. Think about the first time you held a grandchild. I mean, that's emotional bliss, right? I don't know if everyone here has had a great intellectual idea. I'm still working on it personally, but okay. As the soul rises, as a human's neshama becomes more developed, these two Edenic blisses are or can be, he says are, I'm going to say can be grafted together. Then there is no limit to their complete happiness. When their intellectual endeavors and their emotional joy somehow come together, that you're experiencing both of them on a regular basis. Wow, that's amazing. Then there is no limit to their complete happiness, to their Edenic exaltation. Atzilutam, the Hebrew, which is there. I wrote here exaltation. I'm not sure that's the best translation. Atzilut means to be like noble. There's something noble about it. But it's something just wow about it. I'm not sure the best translation. And to their brilliant and refined light, the light meaning the light of their soul. Noach was the complete tzaddik of his generation because he fully integrated his emotions and intellect. He fully integrated his emotions and his intellect. Wow, that's very cool. I'm not saying that Avram didn't and Moshe Rabbeinu didn't and many other, great giants in Jewish and world history, but that's what it meant, that he was tzaddik tamim, perfect. What was perfect about him? That his intellectual needs and his emotional, spiritual needs made one organic whole. It was holistic in that sense. The Torah's description of the negative human behavior that led to the flood is unflinching. The earth became corrupt and was filled with crime. All flesh had corrupted its way on earth. The earth is filled with lawlessness. It is frighteningly current and accurate. Remember, he wrote this in the beginning of the 20th century, the first third of the 20th century. The earth is filled with lawlessness, right? The world continues to be flooded with corruption, crime, and destruction. War is the major activity in terms of commitment and resources. He saw World War I, and he actually was in exile. He was living in Eretz Yisrael, and when the war broke out, he was visiting London, and for a conference of rabbis in London, and he couldn't come back to Eretz Yisrael because at the beginning of the war, Eretz Yisrael was controlled by the Turks, and he still held a Russian passport. He emigrated from Russia to the Russian Empire, to Eretz Yisrael in 1903. And so he was still carrying a Russia. He couldn't get into Eretz Yisrael. So he spent the war, and he saw the war machinery of. I'm not sure if he was in Eretz Yisrael, he would have gotten the same impression that all of the world's resources are being poured into war production. And of course, it became even greater in World War II. And, even today, there's a lot of money to be made on war. War is the major activity in terms of commitment and resources. The hearts and minds of so much of humankind are deeply troubled and locked in hatred and fear. The hearts and minds of so much of humankind are deeply troubled and locked in hatred and fear. We are spending much too much of our intellectual and emotional energy on hating. It's just terrible. And right now, it's getting worse. I mean, right now, we're at war. And this is all we can think about. And Hamas, the modern Hamas has given us a boogeyman to really hate, and it's really, their behavior was totally inhuman, totally reprehensible, totally inexcusable. I mean, even people that haven't been friends of Israel, have shown solidarity with us. Okay, the Torah's call to transform all the evil into good is more critical now than ever. The Torah's call to transform all the evil into good is more critical now than ever. We're putting a lot of energy into this war. I hope when the war is over, we're going to pour at least an equal amount of energy into rebuilding society, we're all scarred by war. But Rav Kook is talking about, when we're not busy fighting, we at some point have to take that kind of massive energy and put it into being good. May we be blessed to become powerful agents of goodness, righteousness, and repair for the sake of our generation and all mankind. Medinat Yisrael. I don't want to be known in the final analysis as a war machine. I don't mind being a startup nation, but I'd really like to be Or LeGoyim. I really think that we should be representing, and we normally do, what it means to be ethical, moral human beings. And I think Rav Kook's description of what he saw in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, I think has to inspire us. Right now, our focus has got to be war. No two ways about it. There is an evil that must be excised from the body of humanity. But once that's done, we have to take that energy and work on healing and work on being good to one another and building the kind of society that's not known just for its wartime endeavors and products, but is known for its contributions to making the world a better place, and eventually bringing about our goal as enunciated by Zechariah, to bring the entire world to recognize the kingship of God, and that everyone should join us in this endeavor of using human energy, not to go to the stars, but to go to heaven, to go to good places in paradise. And even though there's always a place, for intellectual endeavor, Rav Kook talked about that. There's the Edenic bliss of the mind, of the intellect. But the greatest bliss is when we use that power that we have in our minds and our souls to make the world a better place. And although we can't picture it yet, I'm hoping in a couple of weeks we'll start thinking about what can we do to rebuild and again make Eretz Yisrael and the Medina wonderful places that are the envy of the world, not because of our war machine, but because of our morality and ethics. And most of the time we do it, I think. I think we're good at it. I think the world recognizes when there's a disaster anywhere in the world, we're the first responders. We're the world's first responders. And I think it's people with a brain see it and appreciate it. And that we have to return to that as quickly as we can once this horrible job has been accomplished. And hopefully it will be done speedily, because we have to destroy Hamas in both connotations of that word. Okay, thank you so much for joining this evening, and we'll meet again hopefully in the future with Besorot, with good news for everyone. And let people know that the recording should be up by tomorrow morning. Okay, bye all.